understanding that doesn't lead to fellowship and love doesn't cause any kind of change and transformation.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Pursuit. I'm Jeff Hutchin, this is John Saborev, and we are on the relentless pursuit of truth and transformation, and we've got another great show prepared today. A good buddy of ours. You know, the thing I love about The Pursuit, Johnny, is, we have the ability to bring guests on that maybe the world doesn't know about. But I tell you what, our next guest is a guy that maybe the world doesn't know. But I tell you what, the sphere of influence that he has and the friends that he has, he's kind of like, I don't know, do you remember the old E.F. Hutton commercials?
I do.
You remember those?
When E.F. Hutton talks.
Yeah, people listen, right? Everybody stops and listen. Corey Bell is our guest today, and he is the E.F. Hutton of my friend group. I mean, I kind of listen to you sometimes.
Sometimes. But I would say, to me, he's Mr. Worldwide. You said he's not world famous. He's Mr. Worldwide.
He's got a deal going on?
This is Mr. 512 right here.
Either way, hey, Corey Bell, good buddy. Welcome to the show, my man.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. Absolutely. I don't know about all of those descriptors, but whoever the writers are for that, I appreciate them.
Well, let me just ask this question.
Too much, but okay, we'll work on it.
Well, let me just say this. How many friends do you have that have been on the Oprah Winfrey Show?
One. And we're talking to him.
Yeah, it's him right there. So, hey, that's big enough for me. Oprah's about as big as it gets in my book. So, welcome to the show, my man. Great friend. He's been a part of our ministry for a long time. And as a matter of fact, Corey is going to be one of our contributors for The Pursuit. So you're going to hear a lot more from him, not only as a guest, a regular guest here on The Pursuit, but also with blogs and other things I'm sure he's going to be providing for us. So let's get into the topic today. You know, as we've unpacked, first of all, I just need to say this for our viewing audience and our listening audience, that Corey and Ira Williams, who's, as you guys know, has been on the show a couple different times now, are very, very close friends. As a matter of fact, you guys live just a couple blocks from each other, and we're all part of the same ministry group down in Austin, Texas. And we've been, obviously, as you know, Corey, exploring this issue of the racial tension that we're experiencing right now in our country that was really propagated by the George Floyd incident. And Ira has shared his perspective on this a couple different times. And as we reached out to you and began to talk about this issue, you had a different perspective. And so I'm just going to kind of turn it over to you to kind of, for our listeners and our viewers, to kind of share your perspective on this from an angle, quite honestly, I haven't heard discussed much. So share with us your perspective on this, Corey.
Yeah, well, thanks, guys. I wouldn't say necessarily that I have a different perspective, but, you can't beat Ira's communication. I call him the lyrical jazz man. And so you'll never get better than him or anyone else. I'm just a business guy, and I feel like that's part of the ministry God's given me, and wanting to be able to do things to help push the kingdom forward. And so I think if we're to think about the conversation in two parts, one is the kingdom perspective, which we'll get to, and then there's an earthly perspective. And so from an earthly perspective, there are really only two things. Like if you want to operate in this world, everything is a social structure supported by an underlying economic structure. I don't care what it is. There are folks gathering together or connecting in some form or fashion or way, and it's supported by economics, some sort of business model. And so in my mind, all the problems that are social problems are really economic problems with social consequences. And I think that too often we go in and we're not looking at things from the perspective of how do we help, what can we do, and how do we start to make change. So that's sort of my thought process, and how. So even from that perspective, right? When we see folks and they're marching and they're angry, things are going on. If we take it like God has given us the ministry of reconciliation, but there can be no reconciliation without education, right? How can I reconcile with you if I don't understand what you're talking about? In the word it says, wisdom is the principal thing, but in all you're getting, get understanding. Again, get an education. Understand what you're talking about. And so if I'm in an argument with my wife, the more I want her to hear my perspective, and the more she wants me to hear her perspective, we'll never come to an understanding. So we have to be able to yield our hearts in some form or fashion, and it's generally the person who's the angriest, right? So I'm really just trying to understand, why are you angry? What's going on? To let you know that I hear you. I think if we do this as a church community and simply just say 2 words, I care. And that leads to conversations which brings in understanding, we're able to push forward. I think that's in essence, if I had to wrap up what Ira was talking about, I think a lot of that wraps there, okay? If we take from that point, what do we do next, right? In my mind, it's like anytime there's a conflict, we have to find a pathway towards peace. And if we don't understand the pathway towards peace, then we'll never get out of the conflict. I believe that a path towards peace here is understanding the economic issues that are really there and finding ways to help rectify it.
You know, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the importance of seeking first to understand before being understood. We've talked about that principle. We've talked, which you just mentioned. We've talked about the principle of Binah, which is that supernatural understanding that comes through the throne room, right? Wisdom is one thing, understanding is another. Understanding something in a season makes all the difference in the world, right? Because we can't always apply wisdom from one season to the next season. And so I think that's what you're emphasizing here. And certainly you're right. That's exactly what Ira has done in the 2 episodes is this idea of beginning to probe, beginning to ask good questions, beginning to really sitting Shiva. When we were talking about that in our last episode, about really settling in and allow things to absorb within us, as opposed to what our normal reaction is, and that is just to kind of go, wait a minute, let me tell you my perspective, right? And then all of a sudden, to your point, Corey, things shut down pretty quick relationally.
Can I interrupt you just for a second on that? Because I was driving this morning and just thinking about, you watch too much CNN or any other news network, okay? You get the sense that, man, this country is on fire, right? Figuratively and literally. And here in Colorado, we have sort of a unique perspective on fire because fire is a natural cycle in nature. It is actually a natural part of the renewal cycle in nature. For things to be healthy, they must burn and then regrow, right? And if they don't, then things become pretty dangerous, and that's why we do these things called controlled burns in Colorado, where we say, you know what, we need to burn this in order for renewal to happen. To what extent right now are we in sort of a wildfire that may not be producing kind of the long-term benefits of renewal that a short-term kind of controlled burn might? Does that metaphor play out at all in your mind with regard to what's going on here?
Yeah, you know, John, I think it does play out in my mind, but I think if I had to argue a little bit, I think wildfires are things that you can't control. But as believers, we aren't sent here without measures of control. That's, you know, and so I would rather us have a peace fire and not a wildfire. And I think that we have an opportunity to change the conversation to move into a place of peace and less where it's all wild. Because wild means it's just consuming and nothing's going to be there. But if you're going to have a fire, have it for a purpose, which is what you're talking about. I believe that God has sent the things. You know what? He was not surprised that COVID happened. I think the way churches have worshiped, the way that we have seen, the way that we connect with God, I think all of that's changed. I think there have been racial tensions that have come in, that none of this was new. It just brought to the surface. I don't believe God's surprised by all of that. The question is, what do we as believers do with where we are? And I believe the only way we can do it. So if I get into an argument with you, John, the real question isn't what your perspective is, nor is it what my perspective is. It's what's his perspective. What does he want? When the angel of the Lord's armies came before Joshua, Joshua went down and was on his knees, and he said, who are you here for? Are you here for them? Or are you there for us? What was his response? Neither. God is here for his purpose. And I think we need to be sitting back and understanding, Lord, what is your purpose in this time? So, yes, there are ways that I need to connect with people. There are ways that I need to love them. There are ways that I need to be able to do this. But what end am I doing it for? If I'm not doing it to the end of reconciliation, I'm doing it for my own purposes. And that's an idol. And we don't need to be thinking like that. What we need to be figuring out is, God, there is hurt, there is pain, there is something that's there in someone else's life. How do we love them and bring them to the place that we're drawing everything back to you? I'll give you another example. This may be very controversial, and so forgive me, but God has been working on me with this one. So George Floyd passed away. And yes, that went through with Derek Chauvin. I think that's his name, Derek Chauvin. But you know what God was showing me? Is that George Floyd, he doesn't have an opportunity to do anything anymore. But Derek Chauvin is still his son. Derek Chauvin is still his child. And in all of this anger, what are we as believers doing to draw people to Christ? We can't have conversations when we're only pointing fingers and doing that. Somebody has to take the position. And in this case, I would say the Black community is like, we've been given. I want you to hear what I have to say. Well, okay, that's fine. So, and there will be some that says, we can have a different kind of civil conversation. That's fine too. But do we realize that as believers, if we unify, we're able to change the course and context of this country? I'll give you another thought. In Psalm 133, it says, behold how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Okay? Well, what's the opposite of unity?
Division.
So we should see right now that what was going on is a fruit of the enemy, not a fruit of the kingdom. And so we need to be sitting there and seeking his presence on how do we bring unity. I can't bring unity by going in and having a conversation with someone and like, I will not be white shamed. Okay, all right, time out. I understand why people are saying that, but that nomenclature says shame and condemnation pulls you away from the Lord. If there's conviction, conviction brings change. So we got to get past like operating on the earthly plane. We need to understand what is the kingdom saying so that we can unite and push forward. And I think, John, that's the difference between an uncontrolled wildfire and a peace fire.
That's a good word. I love the differences you're making there between condemnation and conviction. We talked about this. That's a sign. That's a sign of the Holy Spirit. Is when we find ourselves in a conflict, when we find ourselves in sin, when we find ourselves with an issue that we have to figure out where are we on this issue. In this particular case, racial discrimination. Have I been racially discriminate in my life? Right. That's kind of the first place. Hopefully, everybody goes is kind of an internal reflection, and you're either going to be convicted of something that you've maybe done in your life, which is a sign of the Holy Spirit, or you're going to be condemned, which is a sign of the enemy. The enemy always wants to push us away from God, and that comes through, to your point, condemnation, whereas conviction is this place of always drawing us back in. Repentance is a sign of conviction, and it's drawing us back in to be back in relationship with the Father. And so hopefully what we're doing as a people group, all of us, by the way, black, white, everybody, is saying, in what areas of my life am I convicted? Holy Spirit, in what areas do I need to be convicted of? And I need to repent of that. Beyond that, if you've dealt with that, or there's no sense of conviction that you have to deal with on yourself, what we have to fight against now is this bitterness that can set in, which I think is very toxic, needless to say, and is beginning to settle into our culture. But I want to circle back to our original discussion, because I think this is important, and this is an issue that I have not heard much narrative on, and this issue of being more, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, if it's more of an economic issue than it is a social issue, but certainly the economic issue plays a significant role in this division that we're seeing right now. Share with me, Corey, because I know you well enough to know you've thought through this. Share with me some empirical evidence that points to that conclusion that you've come to.
Oh, sure. All right. So try this on for size. John, you and I were close to the same age. I'm the first generation born with civil rights in my family. That means my kids are second generation civil rights, meaning they can vote, certain things with homes, all of the things that you're able to have with normal civil rights. So let's back that up. If you had to take statistically, the average black family has 60 to 70% of the wealth or of the income of the average white family. However, the wealth is 10%. That's a big difference. Why is that? One way is through home ownership. Black people weren't allowed to own homes the same way. You weren't allowed to own in certain places and districts. There were red lines. You weren't able to get in to be able to do that. That is the easiest and best way that our economy is set up to be able to pass things down from one generation to the next generation. So I would say experience is a key. So being able to help people gain experience. But let me go back from experience. I would say it's almost hand in hand. The other is exposure. All right. So as I've grown, and I learned this in school, but I didn't get it the same way until practical application happened. I bought my first home in Texas. And we bought our home and we tried to buy closer to our employer. But instead, I had friends who bought closer to the city center, closer to downtown. Their appreciation rates went up dramatically. I'll never forget. And I've been in my home now almost 20 years. And I've had friends who have bought and sold 2 or 3 different homes. And what they were able to do each time, being closer to downtown, one's appreciation was $300,000 in less than 4 or 5 years. The other one's appreciation was $700,000. All in the amount of time that I lived in my same home, which is probably appreciated 20%. Exposure is the key. Because once you're exposed to that, then you're like, oh, I need to think differently. Remember, I just told you of a friend that made anywhere between $1 million to $1.2 million tax-free. Tax-free. That they could either roll into their next home or do whatever they needed to go do. That's the capital that they made. You can change many generations with that one simple concept. But if you don't have the exposure to it, and if you don't have the experience, then what are you going to do? I think that's one way. I think the second thing to do is looking at our Rolodex of people that were around. So practically, who are we talking to? Who's in our life? I am grateful that I have friends that don't look like me. I am grateful that I have friends of almost every particular set. I wouldn't say race because we're all one race, but different kind of nationalities and thinking. I've got Jewish friends, Indian friends, Burmese friends, African friends, white friends, black friends. I've got friends across the entire spectrum. But if we're really believers, look at your phone and think about it honestly. Who's in your life? If you have a problem, are you able to communicate? And would you ask someone who doesn't look like you, A, or better yet, who are you a Paul for and who's a Timothy in your life? Who's there? Who are you mentoring and who are you being mentored by? And does that cross-section all look monolithic? Do they all look like you? If not, I don't think we're operating in the form of the kingdom. I really don't.
So I think Corey, point 1 and point 2 are obviously very intertwined. You talk about exposure, you talk about those that you're around, which those obviously connect to one another. So what are some of the lessons that you've learned? Because I don't want to assume anything. When you were raised in a mixed community or were you raised in a primary black community?
My community was 90% black. Okay. And my mom fought for me to be in the GTE classes, and my classes were 80% white. So if I went to 90% black high school, but my classes were 80% white, that should tell you something. And my mom fought for me to be in those classes. And I'm grateful for that. But that has also been my world. Like, I don't think about it the same way as I think most of my white friends would. So if my white friends were in a room that was 90% black all the time, I think there would be a heavy level of discomfort. I don't know for sure, but I can tell you through some of the conversations I've had with some friends, like they were like, I felt a little uncomfortable. Well, that's my world every day. And you know what? I don't think about it anymore. It just is what it is. But we can't affect change if we aren't intentionally going out and making change. That's an intentional move. So going from high school, going into college, going into graduate school, going into the workforce, starting my first business, starting second business, acquiring the third, all of that stuff, I'm usually, if not the only, one of the few black faces in the room.
So, Corey, I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier. You said that this is an economic problem with social consequences. So, as I think about then the root cause, economic, the symptom, social, is it enough then to say we're going to attack this and we're going to solution around the economic perspective, right? Because if we can just put enough programs into place, enough home ownership incentive programs for disadvantaged, people, or education, as you're saying, so put some education programs on how to best invest your money and those sorts of things. Will that take care of the social problem? Is the symptom going to, correct itself when the root cause is addressed, or is this a multi-layer kind of an issue? But the primary layer that we need to address is economic.
Interesting question. I think it's multi-layered by far. I don't think this is a simple issue. As a matter of fact, I think right now it's a very systemic issue, meaning it's pervasive in many different areas, but we're trying to solve it emotionally. And you can't solve you can't solve a systemic problem with emotional responses. You have to think systemically. Systemically may mean generationally, but we have to start now thinking, okay, whatever we're going to do, what's going to be the secondary and tertiary consequence of these decisions? I'm going to go back to the example I gave of buying my home. So now, when my children, if God allows me to live long enough and I get to see my kids and my grandkids, I will help them understand the difference in location in the home that they buy, which will put them potentially on a different trajectory. Right? We can't solve that problem overnight, but we can solve it. If I look at most corporations and you look for who is a person that has diversity that's of a power of influence, meaning do they have P&L responsibility? The answer will be generally when you see a person of color, black is where I am, but economically, that person is the chief diversity officer, the officer of whatever this. That's not anything that's driving the strategy of the business, nor does it have economic impact. Because when you have economic impact, you're able to get a range of voices. And look, people, be careful. Don't take what I'm saying as, I'm not talking about handouts. I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm saying we have to systematically grow people up. How do we do that? I have a great friend who owns a real estate development firm, and they're doing really well. I mean, they're killing it. I asked him, my oldest is 15. I said, can my son come and intern there in 4 to 5 years? He's my friend, so of course he says yes. But guess who's interning there with him? His nephew. His nephew was going to be an engineer. His nephew started working there, and he's like, I don't want to be an engineer now. I want to go do this. Exposure and experience. He starts off in a different place. I don't know what this young man's trajectory is going to be, but he was exposed to something early on. This particular friend, he started the business because he was in it working somewhere else. He started another business with a partner. His son went to school, and guess what his son has done? Gone into that same kind of line of business. I was 41 years old before I even understood how that business really worked. Experience and exposure. So we have, just in our group, just in the guys that we know that are in the remnant, I know a water guy, I know a guy who's in real estate investments. I know a guy who's in technology. I know a guy who's sold a couple of different businesses. All that's being exposure, which is helping a different way. So then the question not only is, what do we do each one, but also how do we also lift one another as we grow? Generally, when we're lifting one another, all I'm suggesting is look at who you're lifting.
Great truth. You know, just to summarize today's conversation, we're going to wrap it up for today. But this is what I'm hearing, and I'd like to know your thoughts. What I'm hearing here is a theme, more than the social versus economic or any of those kind of things. The theme I'm hearing today is one of intentionality, and I think that's a lesson that all of us can learn from. Obviously, Corey, you're speaking at it from a person in a minority group, and how you begin to move into a place of opportunity is about intentionality. But I think the same is true for John, for guys like you and I, as we seek to understand what's going on in our culture right now, is being intentional and seeking first to understand before being understood, and really seeking out to understand what is it we're facing, and really what is at the root of the problem here? What is the root of the issue? Because until we can identify that, I don't think we have a chance of creating any long-lasting, sustainable answer to this racial issue.
I love that conversations like this model the expansion of our Rolodex that we all need to have. Corey's point, man, look at your phone. Look at your phone. Not that this particular person, because they're African American, is going to have the answer, because we've tended to kind of do that, to say, okay, what's the solution? What's the solution, Corey? But to say, I think that what's being modeled here is just what you said, to seek to understand first, listen to the feelings and experiences of other people, and then bring that under the lordship of Jesus Christ, because any solution that we come up with outside of that is counterfeit. Could I use that term?
Yeah.
And won't hold much water, right? May last for a little bit, may look pretty, may look good, whatever, but it's not going to last. And it's not going to bring true peace.
Yeah. You know, just as an example, and I'll close with this. With my ministry, you know, for years, my ministry was comprised of 30 to 50-year-old white men in the marketplace.
I had to step in and say, man, I got to introduce you to some people. Didn't I?
So John was my diversity officer. No, but you know, it's easy though. Honestly,
it was.
It's easy for me to sit here and go, well, that's the neighborhood I live in, and that's just who I'm around all day long. So yeah, of course, it's not because I have any issue against a minority group. It's just because those are the people I run with.
That's your world, yeah.
But what it required me to do, and yes, John is a big part of this. What it required me to do is to be intentional, to expand my Rolodex. And I'm so grateful I did, because I got a great new friend like Corey Bell and like Ira Williams. I love you guys like my own, and I would die for you at any given moment. And you know I mean that. And I love you, brother. 100. Thank you for joining us on the pursuit.
Say one thing before,
please.
I know you were preaching, but I really want people to hear this piece. The intentionality isn't something that just happens by happenstance. What Hutch is talking about, Hutch has slept in my home. He has been in my home when I haven't been there. He's been there just with my kids and my wife. I have been in his home without him being there, with just his wife and his dogs and his son. That's different. I've been in John's home, just the family. That is what I mean by intentionality and expanding your circle. If you don't have an opportunity to invite someone into your home and into your space, because I think understanding that doesn't lead to fellowship and love doesn't cause any kind of change and transformation. Because it's hard to really discount the concerns of someone that you love, because you want what's best for them. But this didn't happen. I want everyone to hear this. This didn't happen overnight. The first time when John introduced me to Hutch can talk about this conversation later, I wasn't necessarily as receptive. I knew John, but I'm like, who's this big dude that John's bringing to talk to me? I don't know. But I can tell you, over time, my kids don't call Hutch Hutch. They call him Mr. Hutch. They were talking about him the other day. When is he coming back, Daddy? That's different. Does your family know these people? If the family knows them, you have everything that you need. And I think it's the difference between going and seeking God for something. This is the example I think we should really think through. Am I seeking God's hand or am I seeking his face? If I seek his hand, I'm only getting that thing. But if I'm seeking relationship with him, I already have everything. I encourage us all to really seek relationship with other people. And if you have economic advice, help to bring it up, and it will cause change.
Amen. That's a great word, and it goes far beyond the color of our skin. I want to challenge everybody to also add to your Rolodex people that think differently than you, whether it's a different political leaning, whether it's whatever it might be. Add those people to your life, man, because there's so much we can learn from one another, and we can strengthen each other. And to your point, I love what you said, man. I don't see different races because we're all one race. We're a part of the human race. Maybe the quote of our episode today. Corey, I love you, my brother. Thank you for joining us. Hey, everybody, make sure you go to YouTube, subscribe, click on the bell so you're notified every time we get a new episode. We also got a cool website, thepursuitonline.com, where you'll be able to hear more from our man Corey here and others that are contributors to The Pursuit. And here's a cool thing. I'm excited to announce this. We are now simulcasting an audio this very podcast, this very episode on WRNO. It's one of the largest shortwave radio stations in the world. They have a weekly listenership of about 1.5 million people. So our message is reaching a significant amount of people all over Canada and Mexico and South America and God knows where else.
Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 Central, U.S.
right.
Central Time.
That's when it airs on that station.
When it's airing.
So if you have a shortwave radio, what's that?
We love WRNO. WRNO in Central Dallas.
There you go. That's the tagline.
Would you do a jingle for us? That's my question.
Let's do it. Let's hear it right now. Right off the cuff.
I'm good. Let me think on it a minute.
You see, he actually, look, he's blushing. You can actually see it. He's blushing right now. It's awesome, man. All right. Hey, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time on The Pursuit.
See ya.
Later.